Hi friends, welcome to CodeNet, and today we want to understand on how we can place JavaScript inside an HTML document. So definitely, meaning we are talking about the file that has the extension .html or any file, maybe a file that has the extension .php, but for now let's just stick to a file that has the extension .html, because when we understand this, then it will definitely be easy to even understand how JavaScript can be placed in a file that contains the extension .php. So how can we place now definitely JavaScript inside an HTML document? From this code, you can tell that I have just implemented the basic syntax of an HTML document. And like I said earlier, we need to understand HTML before we progress to JavaScript. Hence, I won't even explain the actual syntax of HTML or CSS or anything related to that. If you wish to do so to understand those things, please double check our description. We have the link that will take you to the courses of HTML or CSS, that's if need be based on your own perspective. Otherwise, let's continue with JavaScript. So this is the actual file I have implemented. This is the source code. And to double check, this is the actual file that I am definitely talking about. I simply had to load the HTML and then it's in the browser now, it's open. So this is the actual file that I have implemented. So it's simply the basics of HTML. JavaScript as the name, then the greatest programmer once said, and this is simply H2. So it's simply the basics of HTML. And again, you can tell that I have saved the actual file that I am working on in a certain directory, which is of course named firstjs.html, because .html, that's the actual syntax that the file should have. I mean, we are placing JavaScript inside an HTML document. So from here, we can understand now the two ways which we can use if we want to place JavaScript inside an HTML document. All we need to know is JavaScript is implemented inside the two most important elements of HTML. The very first element of HTML where we can implement, of course, JavaScript is simply in the head as an element of HTML. Like we discussed from our HTML sessions, the head is simply an element that holds on to metadata, data that describes data. Hence, we can also implement JavaScript inside the HTML element. Another element where we can place our JavaScript code is simply the element which is called the body. The body as an element, it is the element that shows the content that should be displayed by the browser. So that's where we can again place our JavaScript as the code or statements that we might need to execute. So what is another thing that we need to understand? Well, we need to understand this thing, which is whenever we want to make JavaScript code or a statement, we need to remember that JavaScript statements are placed in the elements that are called script as a script element in HTML. I'm sure you can also tell JavaScript should be placed in script elements of HTML. So it is the elements which are called script which we can place either in the head as an element of HTML or in the body as an element of HTML. So let's start implementing that. So we'll create a simple JavaScript. I'm sure some things you won't understand, because for now we are just understanding if definitely we can place in the head or the body as simply the elements of HTML. So to implement JavaScript, I say that first we need to create the script as the elements of HTML. So to create an element in HTML, an element should have the starting tag and an ending tag, the opening tag or the closing tag. I mean, it depends with the teacher who taught English and anything related to that. So we can say, okay, let's create a script. That is the actual element where we need to place our JavaScript code. So immediately you close, I mean, you can tell I started with a less than sign and I should close the starting tag with a greater than sign. Immediately I close, the ending tag will be provided by the IDE. this is why I love using Visual Studio Code, because it intelligently entails that, yeah, this is an element, hence let me provide the closing tag or the ending tag. So this is the actual code. So I will talk about something that we'll again understand in our next session, and this thing is called JavaScript functions. The code that I want to implement, I want the code of JavaScript to be within a certain function. I mean, this means whenever I want to use now the actual code, I will just be calling the function, and the code that are within or inside that function will be executing. I mean, it is a simple way of calling JavaScript. So let's implement a function. A function, we can implement that in JavaScript by using the keyword function, and immediately we say function, I mean it's more like we are building a certain store or anything that will hold on to certain data. I mean a store, that's a good example. So we are saying, okay, I'm building a store, or should I just say I'm building a function, but when you are done building that function, what is the name that we'll be using to call that store? I mean, what is the name of this function that you are implementing? So, okay, I'm implementing a function, and the name of this function should be descriptive to the actual things that it will be doing. Hence, I will give it the name JS function _1. The name should be descriptive. You can give it any name. I personally am calling it JavaScript function number 1. Hence, this will allow me to create more functions. If I want to create another function, I will just say, okay, JavaScript function number 2, JavaScript function number 3. So I am calling this as our first function as simply JavaScript function _1, which is number 1, and you also provide the parentheses. From there you can now implement the curly braces, and immediately you do that, then it means you now need to create the body for this function, the code that you want this function to be executing. So how can we implement now the actual things? Let's just print out something on the screen for we to see that yes, definitely we can place JavaScript code in the head as an element of HTML. So to print out something, don't worry again if you don't understand the code that I will be implementing. If you want to print out something, you can print out using this method that I will be using. For in our next session, I'm sure the third session from now, we'll understand the actual things that we are doing at printing out something, and we'll see the other 2 ways that we can use if we want to print out something on the screen or the console of an HTML document. So to print out something, for now I just say, okay, I'm creating a document, and this is a document, and then I want to get the element. Don't worry if you don't understand this, because we'll be understanding this in the next sessions. So I'm printing out, of course, get the element by ID, and then once you do that, then you can open the parentheses, then specify the actual ID. You can tell that I'm saying, okay, get the element by ID. So I should place an ID into a certain element of HTML. So let's place the ID here. I will say, okay, ID, and let's just say, okay, ID _1, ID number 1. So when I go back, I will say, okay, I want to print out the content that's on ID number 1, and the content that's on ID number 1 should be printed using inner HTML. Don't worry if you don't understand this. I mean, this is the things that we'll be understanding. I just want to show you that yes, JavaScript can be implemented in the head element of HTML. So inner HTML, open the double quotes, and this is where you place now the content that you want to print out on that element where you've specified the actual ID. So I will just say, okay, print out never lose respect for programming. So yeah, never lose respect for, never lose respect for programming. So definitely I can even add that, and then I terminate each and every line of JavaScript with a semicolon. So this is what I have done. So now, yes, I've implemented JavaScript code inside the head element of HTML, meaning JavaScript can be implemented in the head element of HTML for as long as the actual code that we want to implement is within the script as another element of HTML. Hence, we are nesting script inside the head element of HTML. Now let's call that actual function for it to print out the content. So we will implement a button, and this button, of course, you can understand how to create buttons and anything related to that if you double check the courses in HTML, of course, even here on CodeNet. So I will say, okay, the type of this button is simply button, and then I can say, okay, on click, meaning once the user clicks on this button, then call the function which is JS function. Of course, let me double check if this is the actual name. Okay, yeah, JS function number 1. So underscore, then 1, then from there you can even open the parenthesis, because it means we've now fully specified the actual name for the function. And you can again intel that a button is simply an element of HTML, and this is why the IDE has provided the ending tag or the closing tag of this element, which is button. Hence, the actual things that will be calling the function, which is JS function, should be in the starting tag or simply the opening tag of a button, meaning the actual button that we want to implement. So we can say, okay, read, let's just say read what he said. So Control S to save, and we can go back on our browser, which is the actual browser we are using to implement the code. Immediately we refresh, we've implemented, of course, a button, which is, okay, the greatest programmer once said, read what he said. Immediately I do this, then you can tell that, okay, the code that we want to print out, which is never lose respect for programming, is definitely being shown on our browser, and we are even seeing the actual content. If we go back on our actual IDE, here again you can double check that instead of just implementing the script, which is the actual JavaScript, which is inside the script element of HTML in the head as an element, we can also implement the actual code of JavaScript in the body as an element of HTML. So let's just cut this code. Immediately we cut, of course, Control X. We can come down now on the body as an element of HTML, and we paste. Immediately we paste and go back on our browser. Let's go back. We refresh the actual page. Okay, the greatest programmer once said, immediately we will refresh. Again, we will see the actual results, the same results. Never lose respect for programming. Hence, HTML can accept JavaScript codes if we implement the actual code inside the head as an element of HTML or inside the body as an element of HTML. I mean, what is simply needed is simply the neatness. We need to be neat when implementing such things. So this is the actual thing that we can implement for today, and this is the actual session that explains on how JavaScript can be implemented inside an HTML document. Let's progress on our next session for it to understand how we can now call external JavaScript, the JavaScript that's in a file which has the extension .js.javascript inside the file that has an extension .html. I mean, even CSS, we are learning about the same things. We can call CSS from a file .css, or we can simply implement CSS inside an HTML document. But how can we implement JavaScript inside an HTML document that is coming from an external JavaScript document? Let's progress on our next session, and please don't forget to subscribe moreover you are on CodeNet.